Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are all doing well and excited for our orientation together this afternoon. You've just seen a video that was created by UT Austin's Global Education Office about health and safety, and we thought we would just give you something interesting to watch while you're waiting for this session to begin. So thanks for being here today, and we'll get going on the next slide in just a second. You all should have been able to register in the session as you joined the Zoom meeting. But in case you haven't, there is a QR code right here where we are just trying to capture the amount of folks who are at our meeting this afternoon. So if you don't mind doing that real quickly, if you didn't already register, please take a quick second to do that. And I know we still have some folks joining from the waiting room. All right. Okay, so my name is Chris Chunnis, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Global Education Office here, and I have a lot of SDSU colleagues who are joining me today, many of whom have been behind the scenes on planning various aspects of your experience that you are about to have abroad this summer, this fall, or this coming academic year. We have a health and safety orientation on the agenda today, and this is a list of the various topics that we are going to be covering. After each section, we are going to have a minute to ensure that you've been paying attention. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of each section here so that while it's still fresh in your mind, you have a chance to clarify anything that was not as straightforward as you hoped. We have 2 hours together today, so we will be going through a lot of information really quickly. We appreciate your attention. We know this is lunchtime, so grab a snack, do what you need to do, but we really appreciate your attention and your focus. This is going to be recorded, so we sent out to all summer, fall, and academic year participants so that you can reference any piece of it at a later time. But before we get started with our first speaker, we're just going to make sure that everybody is set to go, that you're all on mute if you don't mind when you're not speaking. And if you do have questions, you can place them in the chat as we go along, and we will catch those again after each section. So without any further ado, on the next slide, I want to highlight the next steps after this presentation. So the next piece that I want to highlight here is that this section of your preparation for study abroad is focused on health and safety. And we're going to be going over various aspects of what health and safety means, as you saw in the previous slide. But in terms of program-specific pre-departure meetings, and both of these are required, I know there was a question about that, the global seminars will also have a meeting with their faculty leader, who's going to be traveling with them this summer. SDSU exchange programs, the Global Education Office will be offering a region-specific pre-departure orientation that's led by a GEO advisor. If you're participating in a CSU IP program, an IB program, an ISEP program, an API program, you will be getting pre-departure information or meetings scheduled with your program provider or the office that is in charge of planning your experience and who has been working with you already. Go ahead. There's a couple other things we want to just get out of the way right from the get-go here. One of the things that's sort of the biggest looming thing on everyone's mind is we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So we just want to highlight that at minimum, SDSU students must be in compliance with SDSU's vaccination requirements in order to participate in study abroad. That means updating your vaccination or ensuring that you're testing regularly and posting to Health eConnect. Any additional COVID requirements might vary by program and destination. So just please be aware of that. And the next slide, there's a couple of other tips here about traveling during the current COVID-19 pandemic. And that's just basically getting really familiar with what to expect on site in the location that you're going to be traveling. Make sure you're packing a mask if you know you're going to need one. Make sure that you are up to date on vaccinations. You know which services you can access in the case of an emergency. Knowing also that these are going to change. We know that things are not the same this week as they were last week in terms of when and where students and people in the United States need to wear a mask. This is changing around the world rapidly. So just please keep an eye on this. So the next person we have on the agenda is Erin Brown from Wellbeing and Health Promotion. So I'm going to hand over the microphone now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erin. Like it was said, I'm here from Wellbeing and Health Promotion. I'm a health promotion specialist there, and I'm just here to talk about staying healthy abroad. So before you study abroad, we're going to talk about a few tips and different resources you can use to make sure you're good to go before your trip. So it's really important to make sure you are your healthiest self before you head off to a foreign country for this experience. So we know that there are many dimensions to health. So physical, mental, spiritual, financial. Use the resources at SCSU and in the community to make sure everything's good to go before you head out. So we're going to talk about some ways that you can prepare. So one of the important ones is prescription medications. So if you are someone that takes any sort of prescription medication, here's some tips for you. You want to make sure you pack your medication and carry-on luggage. That ensures that you have easy access to it, and that in any chance that you lose your luggage or it's misplaced, you have your medication with you. You want to make sure you have copies of your prescription, proving that they're your prescription. And it's also important to leave a copy with a trusted person. So it could be a roommate, friend, any sort of family member. You want to make sure you plan accordingly, according to how long you're going to be gone. Some trips may be just a month. If you're gone for the entire semester, you want to make sure you have everything you need. Some medications may be described as controlled substance. So you want to make sure that you have the proper paperwork and you're looking into all the extra precautions if needed. So having some sort of letter from your primary care physician is certainly helpful. Lastly, you can check ahead with the American Embassy or consulate to make sure your medication is allowed in the country. And so there's a website so you can look it up specifically. A great resource before you travel abroad is Student Health Services. So you can make appointments with a healthcare provider, and they're conveniently on campus at the Cal Poly Center. You also want to check the Travax report. So it'll show you what vaccinations are required for the country you're going to, and kind of help you plan out how far in advance you need to get them and schedule your appointments. In terms of prescriptions, you can also talk to Student Health Services about your prescriptions and figure out everything you need to in advance. For students who are interested in a consult to check on any of these items, you can call Student Health Services. It is recommended that you get an appointment well in advance to ensure that everything is taken care of before you head off to your experience. Another great resource before traveling abroad is the CDC. And so you can check the CDC and go to this website. It'll give you the information that you need specific to the country or region that you're going to. Some helpful things are vaccinations, any sort of research related to health concerns, or now COVID-19 as well, and tips for health and safety. And so when I was an undergrad, I had the opportunity to go to Kenya. And before I went to Kenya, I certainly checked CDC's recommendation on vaccinations and just ways to stay safe in general. Another important aspect is having everything that you need. So you want to pack a travel health kit. So some things you may need are over-the-counter medications, such as Advil. You want to pack COVID tests as well. That way you can test when needed. For any sort of prescription for your trip, as we explained on the prescription slide, you want to make sure that your prescription is in the bottle container that has your name on it, thus proving it's yours. Again, you may require a note from your doctor. Any medications to prevent malaria, antibiotics if prescribed, insect repellent, sunscreen, hand sanitizer. If you happen to be someone who wears contacts, you want to make sure you have your contact lens solution and eye drops, and then any sort of Band-Aids or over-the-counter ointment. You also want to plan for safe sex. You can make a birth control plan, make sure everything's planned out. You have the amount that you need prior to going on your trip. You want to pack condoms as well, because safe sex is important, and get tested before you leave. So for all of these points here, you can meet with Student Health Services or Wellbeing Health Promotion to talk about all of these items. So there's a question slide here, but I know that I have a few more slides and we will take questions at the very end. So while you're studying abroad, important part of this is actually getting there. So depending on where you're going, you may have a very long flight ahead of you. In that case, you want to ease the symptoms of jet lag. So before you go on your long flight, it is best to avoid any sort of large meal, alcohol or caffeine, anything that's going to be unsettling or keep you up. You want to stay well hydrated. If you can, stand up as much as possible. Make sure you get the standing hours on your Apple Watch. You want to make sure you're wearing comfortable clothes because, again, you're probably flying for a very long time. And these last 2 points go together. You want to adapt to your local time schedule as soon as possible. So if they're in a different time zone, you want to try to arrive and make sure you're kind of on that sleeping schedule. And so you can try to fix your sleeping schedule or adapt it prior to traveling. And then while you're flying, try to get as much rest as possible. So again, all of these top bullet points will help you be comfortable and make sure that you're well rested. So when it comes to partying, there's a general rule of thumb. So if there's something that you wouldn't do in San Diego, you probably shouldn't do it while you're abroad. And so I think safety is a huge aspect of all of this. You don't want to leave your friends behind, people who are in your program, people that you're meeting there. You want to take care of each other and essentially make sure you're not experiencing bystander effect. Like if you see something, say something. The situation feels off, it probably is. A fantastic way that you can kind of check in on people or people who are in your abroad program. You can share location, use Find Friends. It's a fantastic way to keep tabs on people. You want to protect your drinks while you're out, make sure you're staying safe. And this last point here, you want to carry the phone number of local police or any local contacts that you have. So could be your program, advisors on the program. Just make sure you have all the numbers that you may need readily available. So I'd like to talk about some other safety precautions. Everywhere is different, but there are going to be risks that are specific to your destination. Make sure you're paying attention when advisors are going over these risks. You want to take the time to make sure you're familiar with your area and certainly be aware of cultural differences. You want to avoid involvement with high-risk activities. So some examples here would be skydiving, deep sea diving, because these specific experiences are not covered under your insurance. You also want to be aware of illness precautions relevant to your destination. Again, if you go to CDC Travel, they'll give you a pretty good idea of what those illnesses may be, and avoid foodborne illnesses or water if it applies to your area. So just be mindful of what you're eating, what you're drinking, how things are washed. So while you're abroad, in terms of staying healthy, when should you see a doctor? So what are some signs that you should look for? anytime they have diarrhea and a fever, anytime they have bloody diarrhea. If you're visiting a malaria risk area and become sick with fever, flu-like illness, if you're bitten or scratched by an animal, if you've been in a car accident, have been seriously injured, or sexually assaulted. So some of these things may seem minor, such as bitten or scratched or any sort of minor injury. But in a lot of these cases, it's better to be safe than sorry. You should certainly check up on them as soon as possible. So when it comes to alcohol and other drugs, going along with the party slide, so the SCSU Student Code of Conduct applies while you're abroad. And you're also subject to your country's age and alcohol use laws. And so one of the important things to kind of remember here is while you're abroad, when it comes to alcohol, they have different standard drinks. So when we're talking about standard drinks, we're talking beer, wine, liquor. It's more than likely going to be different while you're abroad. So they could have higher alcohol percentages than you're used to, different sorts of alcohol. So you just need to be mindful of that. And you want to remember that most accidents that occur abroad involve the use of alcohol. So when it comes to sexual safety, we talked about meeting with Student Health Services or Wellbeing Health Promotion to kind of have a safe sex plan. There's some other things there. While you have your plan in place, you want to remember that no strangers, certainly a risky situation. Again, alcohol can make sex riskier. Important point here, if you or a friend have been sexually assaulted, you want to call the police immediately and don't shower. Make sure you know where and how to report and get help immediately. If you choose to engage in sex, always use a condom. This is important for preventing pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. And on the point of STDs, you want to get tested before you go and when you return, just to be safe if you are sexually active. So covered a wide variety of topics here, but want to let everyone know what our resources are at SDSU. So many of them you may be familiar with. We've talked a lot about student health services. You can call or go online to make an appointment to talk about anything that's been discussed on this presentation. As previously mentioned, CDC is a fantastic resource to find out the exact things you need for traveling abroad to your specific destination. The US State Department, fantastic as well. World Health Organization will keep you updated on travel, and the US Embassy. So certainly write down these resources and feel free to reach out to Student Health Services to, again, schedule your appointments or address any concerns before you head off to this experience.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It sounds like we have a couple of folks who have a blurry screen, and I just want to say that if you need to exit the Zoom call and join back in, we can let you back in via the waiting room in case it's a connection issue. So I know that was a question earlier in the chat. But at this point, we want to just check in and make sure that everyone is getting the information and understanding it. So we're going to launch a quick poll. All right, it looks like the majority of folks were paying attention here. You should confirm that your medication is allowed in the country where you're going, and make sure to ask your doctor to provide you with enough medication for your entire trip and carry a letter from your doctor with the prescription information. And I think I can share that. All right, so we'll move on. Our next topic is going to be mental health abroad. And for this topic, we have SDSU Counseling and Psychological Services. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erica Mora. I'm one of the therapists at the Counseling Center, and I'm going to be talking about mental health abroad. And before we move to the next slide, I just wanted to say that what we're going to cover is like taking care of your mental health before you go abroad, while you're abroad, and when you return. So I'm going to ask you, you don't have to, if you want to, you can answer in the chat, but it's more for self-reflection. Think about a time when you had a big change or a big transition. And I think sometimes the one that comes to mind for me first is going to college, because it's such a huge transition and something very different and new. And then when you think about that, think about, oops, I think that person, okay. How did you respond to that? Like, what were some thoughts of some feelings that you had whenever you were preparing to come to college? Do you have any sensations in your body, like nervousness or like, like butterflies in your stomach? Do you have any stress response as you were preparing? So maybe just take a moment to think about that for yourself. Somebody put here in the chat, like worrying about making friends. Yes, like, hey, will I find my people? Will I be able to connect? Will I feel safe? So many things. Will I be able to manage things? So those are just a few of the things that can come up. And we'll talk more about it in the next slide. We can and then so before traveling abroad, let's move to the next slide and let's talk about it. So just want to normalize that whenever you're traveling abroad, you might have so many different emotions, right? You can be very excited because it's an exciting time, but you can also feel anxious, or you might be feeling sad, like, hey, maybe you have a relationship here that you're like, oh, I'm sad, I'm excited to go on this trip, but I'm also sad to leave this relationship for a while, or for the separation, maybe difficulty sleeping or changes in your appetite. Just difficulty concentrating, like, okay, there's so many things I need to prepare. So just know that all of these things are normal, and doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that you're a human being, and whenever there's a change coming, you're going to have a reaction to that. So just something to notice is you stress. If you haven't heard this word before, that's something that we experience when we're excited or a little nervous about something that we're looking forward to, or when experiencing something new. So it feels sometimes a little bit like stress, similar, but it's like this more positive, like form of stress that is like, it's just about excitement. And we know that sometimes excitement and anxiety can feel very similar. We'll go to the next one, please. So things to think about before going abroad. Have realistic expectations. So know that, hey, sometimes things are not going to go as you plan. And there might be sometimes that you arrive and like whoever you thought you were going to meet is not there, or it's taking a little longer. Sometimes things just don't go as planned. But just having that, just preparing yourself like, hey, I'm going to have this flexible attitude to this trip, and know that, hey, things might not flow exactly as I expect them, but that's okay. Reflect also. If you've experienced a strong stress response or other mental health concerns before, be prepared for what you might experience when you're abroad, and maybe reflect on that and also plan ahead. So what are some things that helped you in your previous, whenever there was a stressful time before? What were some coping skills you used? Who were some people there that help you to, deal through a difficult situation? Was there a mental health app that you used? So think about those things and those tools. Next slide, please. Very important. If you're currently seeing a therapist, make use of that time to prepare as well. Talk to your therapist that probably knows you and knows the things that, your strengths, the things that you struggle with, the things that you're trying to work through. And hey, let's prepare for this trip. Let me talk to you about like, how am I feeling about this? What are some resources that I'll have while I'll be there? Also, if you have a psychiatrist, very important. I think, as mentioned before in the previous presentation, let them know, get prescription ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is like to run out of your medication while you're abroad and having difficulty getting access to that. So making sure that you have enough refills for the time that you're in another country. Next one. Very important. So if something happens before your departure that is distressing, traumatic, life-changing, and I'm thinking like, hey, maybe some painful situation, maybe some loss, take some time to reflect on that too. Consider talking to someone, to a family member, to a faculty, about like, hey, is this the right, for them to be aware of what you're experiencing, but also to think about, is this the right time for me to go? Do I need to delay my trip? Should I continue with this trip? It really, really take, I guess, practice self-care and like, what is it that I need right now? If you need support before going abroad, something that you can do, you can talk to your mental health provider. Of course, also access your friends, family. And if you don't have a mental health provider, you can also call the counseling services, and we can see, hey, do we have here the services that could help you, or can we refer you? Do we have any group that might be helpful as you're preparing, or with whatever might be, might be the struggle at that time. We also have, it's not here in this slide, but we have talk it out spaces. So you can just go talk it out SDSU. And then it'll, those are spaces that sometimes if you're like, well, I don't want therapy, but I just want to chat with someone for like 20 minutes, you can do that. And just like, hey, I'm feeling this way. And just, it's just a space for you to talk about anything that you might be going through. Then let me see. So while abroad, how do you take care of yourself while you're abroad? Again, go with an open mind, right? You're going to notice, depending on the country where you're going, and I think any country, you're going to notice some differences between your country and in the place that you're visiting. Like it can be from the food to the weather, the language, cultural norms, smell, transportation, clothing, access to internet, so many things. So having an open mind and curiosity about the things that you're going to encounter. And it's, again, normal to experience culture shock, sometimes homesickness or sadness, sometimes some anxiety or stress, or maybe feeling like you're having a panic attack. And again, it doesn't mean that you're going to have all these things. Sometimes it might be like, no, I'm just excited. But if you experience any of those things, know that it's also normal. Next slide, please. And just for people to know, so what is a panic attack? And it's more than feeling overwhelmed. So panic attacks are an intense physical experience that peaks and then resolves. Generally, they are brief. They might feel long, but they're brief and then normally less than 10 minutes. So some symptoms from a panic attack: racing heart, difficulty breathing, chest pains, tingling or numbness in the hands and fingers, feeling weak, faint or dizzy, feeling sweaty or having chills, sense of terror, impending doom, and feeling you might die, feeling of loss of control. So if you notice, like, hey, these are some symptoms that I'm having, know that, hey, this might be a panic attack. And let's go to the next slide, which I think has really good information to remember that it will pass and you will not die from it. You might feel, because your body's sending you all these signals, like something's happening, but know that it does not cause a person to die. And something to do and important, and if you don't practice it yet, it's important to put it in your repertoire of like coping skills, is practicing deep breathing. And so I'll take a minute to just model that. And if you're in a place where you can do it, I would invite you to practice it yourself. So what we want to do is that we want to take a slow inhale, and maybe 3 seconds to do that inhale. You don't have to do like, no, not like that. You can just do like a slow inhale, and then as you're inhaling, feel like your belly inflating, almost like a balloon expanding. And sometimes it helps to put your hands on your belly and just see how it expands as you inhale, and try and hold it, and then slowly try and exhale as well. So let's try it one time. Let's inhale, hold it, and then slowly exhale. Try it one more time. Inhale. Hold it again. And then slowly in 3-4 seconds. And if you did this, you probably even notice a sense of calmness in your body. Might not be for everybody. Sometimes you might need to do it more than 2 times. You might need to do it 5 times, 10 times. But eventually it will help your body regulate. We're going to go to the next slide, please. In this, I know that the PowerPoint will be shared. So when in your own time, you can use that Calm app, and then you can even practice with the breathe bubble. So this breathe bubble just expands as you inhale, and then I guess gets smaller as you exhale. So it's just a way, if you need a visual, that can be helpful. And the reality is that there's apps, there's on YouTube, you can quickly find something. So there's a lot of resources. If you have an Apple Watch too, you can do it. Thank you, Jenny, for sharing that. Next slide, please. So talking a little bit about what is a culture shock. Maybe you've experienced it before, if you've traveled before, maybe you haven't, but we're just going to go through that process so that way, if you were to experience it, you recognize it. So first, we start at the top where it says honeymoon phase cultural euphoria. It's like whenever you just arrive, you're so excited, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm here, and just so excited and just enjoying the newness of everything. And then sometimes it might happen that as you continue to be in that city where you're at, in that country, you start noticing the differences between your country where you're coming from and this place. And maybe sometimes having some anxiety or some irritation, like, why do they do things this way? Why does it take so long to do this or that? Like different reactions. But maybe we start noticing those things that we don't enjoy quite as much. And then we might start to, if we go to the next one, we might start to feel lower mood or homesickness. Maybe that's a time where you're like, oh, I really miss this friend or this family member, this place in my city. So that might happen, that you start just having that homesickness. And then there's also the adjustments phase. And that is when you begin to kind of work through that culture shock and you start negotiating those differences. Like, oh, okay, this is different, but this actually works out here. Oh, and this is, and kind of just complementing things. And I'll say that goes towards acceptance as well. When you start like, I like these things about this culture, I like these things about my culture, how do they complement each other? And then you kind of have more of this like acceptance for the place where you're at. And then eventually you come back to your home country, and we're going to talk more about that later because there's also a process in that. The next slide, please. So while abroad, how to make the most of your experience. So sometimes like something, and maybe these are like, oh, I know this already, but important to mention them. If you blog about it, journal, post pictures, talk to other students, talk to your faculty advisor, talk about how you're experiencing this whole trip and the things that you're liking, not liking, everything. Just process that with others and with yourself. Self-care activities, right? There's time change, but make sure you get enough sleep, drink plenty of water. Maybe at the beginning, it can be like, oh, that dietary, like your diet changes completely because you're in a new place, but eventually you'll find your place where like, okay, how do I meet my diet needs and what I actually know that I need to eat that gives me energy, that gives me in a good mood, things like that. Consider special food needs, wear sunscreen, and use your tools to manage stress. So if it's a mental health app, if it's your phone, if it's talking to friends, make sure you're using that. And when to reach for extra support. So if you're having depressed mood, excessive worry, desire to isolate, many panic attacks, no, hey, maybe I need to reach out to my advisor here during my time here. And then there's some questions there that I'm sure somebody else will answer later about nutrition facts. After abroad too. If you feel, so when you come back, you also go through that process of like, yeah, you're back home. And then there's also like that moment where you start noticing like, hey, I don't know if I find my place. Like I was already like that country where I was my place. And now it's like, how do I adjust to being here? And then you have like this realization stage that nothing significant, noticing significant changes at home and in oneself, because of course your time in another country is going to change you too. So then you start noticing like, hey, there's those changes that have happened here and these changes that have happened within myself. And then eventually you'll go to, again, kind of like when you were abroad, that you'll start like complementing, like, hey, okay, so this is my new self, and this is my situation here. How do I complement them? How do I integrate the things that I learned in this other place now to when I'm home? And of course, if you feel down for more than 2 weeks, talk to a trusted friend, parent, or counselor. Next slide, please. After abroad, integrate your experience. So stay in touch with friends from the trip because you'll have so much in common from that experience that you had. Talk about your trip with in moderation, that other people are not like, oh my God, there comes this person again, and they're going to talk about Italy, wherever they were again, but in moderation, but do talk about it. Stay connected to your host culture. Right now, it's so easy to do it through the internet. You can listen to podcasts, see movies related to the country where you were, read books about it, but just stay connected and give yourself time to adjust, and know that hey, if you're struggling with that adjustment, it's part of the normal process, and eventually it will get better. And join an organization on campus, and there's the Global Aztec Alliance. Let's go for the next slide. This is more for you to do, and you'll have access to this PowerPoint. So sometimes create your personal plan. So here is like supporting my emotional well-being before you leave on your trip, during your trip, and after my return home. What are some things that you can do to care for yourself and to manage stress if stress is coming up? And also think about like ways to integrate your experience, like after the trip, like, and this is just ideas, right? I plan to do the following to use my new knowledge and interest, highlighting these parts of my trip in 10 minutes, highlighting these parts of my trip in 30 minutes. So just integrate that experience that you had, and maybe journal. That sometimes can be so powerful, just taking some time to write it down. And next slide, please. Just checklist of tools to bring with you. Bring your deep breathing apps if you use one, any mental health apps. If you go to a counseling center website, there's a self-care section. And then where you can see like recommendations for apps, coping skills, and just tools for almost any topic that you can think of. Download apps before you leave. Here are some free apps I would suggest. Journal, paper, or on your phone. Take water, reusable water to keep hydrated. I think in the previous presentation, a lot of these things were mentioned, but yes, of course, take a comfy pillow. If you have prescription medications, please make sure to take them and take enough for your whole trip, or work out something with your doctor. Get the phone numbers for your close friends, or like your support system, and other portable tools you found helpful to manage stress in the past. So if you have like a squeeze ball, anything that you use to manage stress, take it with you. And then next slide, please. Okay, so additional support, and you'll have access to these. You can also just Google Counseling and Psychological Services at CSU, but know that we're open from 8 to 4:30. And then normally if you call, you will get a 15-minute phone consultation. And from there, that therapist will make recommendations about, hey, what might be helpful. This is a number and the website and where we're located. And although right now we're under construction, so maybe don't go to the location because we're not going to be there, maybe next month. And I think this is maybe the last slide. Should we do one more or move to the next one? Okay, that was it. Are there any questions? Actually, let me see the chat if I miss any question. I think I didn't. There was one about nutrition facts, but I think somebody else might be able to answer that question a little better.
Thank you so much, Erika.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I know there are some questions too about which participants in this Zoom room might be going on the same program. And that's actually a great question for either your GEO advisor, your faculty leader, or your partner organization, and they can connect you with other SDSU participants in your same program. So that's definitely the fun part of the preparation. So please do that. Now I have a quick poll about the mental health portion of this presentation. So we're going to go ahead and launch that. All right, so true or false, if you are currently seeing a therapist, you should tell them you are going abroad and discuss any relevant issues or concerns. And that answer is true. So thank you for participating. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next section, which is student conduct abroad. So with that, now we're going to be hearing from student rights and responsibilities.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Welcome, Allison.
Wonderful. Hi. How's everyone doing? How exciting that you all are going abroad, and excited to be speaking with you kind of about our conduct process, and hopefully something that none of you will ever have to experience on your journey. Glad Great, so let's go to the next slide. So yeah, I am Allison Kendricks. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a student conduct coordinator here in the Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities. Our director is Dr. Lee Mintz, and our associate director is Kevin. And we have a great team of other student conduct coordinators like myself who run through our judicial process, as well as our front desk staff that helps answer any questions that you all might have after this presentation, or you can ask me any questions afterwards as well. Next slide. Great. So the purpose of our process and why our office exists at all is to have student retention, right? We want to be able to prevent or intervene or identify any types of risk behavior that students might be going through or experiencing or having within their community, and be able to like intervene with that experience or any of that behavior, and make sure that students are being a great part of their community. And so that applies abroad. We want to maintain a safe environment. We want to make sure that people are being held accountable to their actions around their peers and in the classroom and outside the classroom. So we also want to protect the rights and the safety of all of the campus and community members. So our office has some pretty big tasks, but that also goes along with your role as a student when you're abroad. Next slide. Thank you. So you might be wondering, how can you read all of the really, really fun code of conduct? It's really fascinating stuff. I'm totally joking, but it's important information to have and look at. So if you ever have any questions about, hey, what is in the student handbook? What's going on? What are my rights as a student? What am I responsible to? We do have a link right on the screen. And also this is easy to find on our website. You can just type in student affairs, student conduct. You can type in Center for Student Rights and Responsibilities. All these things should auto-populate some of our information around what are your rights and what can be considered a policy violation. Great, so like I said, there's the website there. And it says the student code of conduct includes individual student behavior off campus and university related activities. So you might be wondering, wow, I'm gonna be abroad, like do all these things still apply to me? And absolutely, yes, they do, because it's something that is school sanctioned. It is a university related activity. So anything that you do or participate in abroad will apply here. The code is meant to reduce the behavior that threatens the health or safety of our students, disrupt the educational process, or negatively affects the university relationship with the community. So that means, like, yeah, if you interrupt that process or kind of intervene with your educational process or your peers, that could be a policy violation. Next slide. Cool. So, I mean, this is not fun conversation typically, but there are choices, right? There are choices that student makes abroad or students make here. And so that choice, to discipline, it's not our choice that we want to have these conversations with students and discipline them. It means that there was an action that happened beforehand that makes us have to have a conversation and see what kind of resources does a student need to move forward and kind of learn from their mistakes, or have some sort of restorative call or practice to come back into community. So I just want to remind you that all your choices are really important that you make in anywhere, anytime as part of your academic career. And so it's important that that there are laws, there are policies, there are guidelines, and some of these things might lead to a particular discipline. So that's our little lecture on that. Next one. Great. So I mean, this is the what to kind of look out for, maybe what not to do. This is not an exhaustive list of policy violations. That would be super boring. But here's some things that we might typically see. So there's dishonesty, right? There's cheating, there's plagiarism. It's really important that you all are reading your syllabus and understanding what could be considered cheating, what kind of collaborative work is allowed or not allowed. Plagiarism, I think a lot of people think that they know what plagiarism is, and then we have conversations with students that they say, I didn't know that I couldn't cite something this way, or I didn't know what was going on. And so to make sure you're not having any of those trip ups, make sure you all are reading your professor's syllabus. There also could be health and safety issues kind of related to fights, physical abuse, threats, intimidation, sexual misconduct, some of the more heavy stuff. Next slide. But also maybe anything that you might see on that close friends list this weekend of Coachella. I don't know if any friends or any of y'all are headed there, but maybe I would say just don't do any of those things, right? So drugs, illicit drugs, possession of those drugs. You don't know what the laws are, policies sometimes of the different countries. So it's really important that you're aware of your surroundings, aware of what's happening. What a friend might say or a local person might say is, oh, that's totally fine. XYZ never happens here. Sometimes those things happen. And so you just want to be really aware and making your own choices and your own decisions related to that. Next slide. So alcohol, we do see a lot of policy violations happen when students are intoxicated or where communities members are intoxicated. And so we just want to really make sure that you're aware of that, aware of the drinking age abroad. Alcohol is not permitted as a part of the program unless there's prior approval. So it's really important to know that, you know, you are subjected to local laws and you will be held responsible for those things. And any violation or risky behavior usually happens when there's alcohol involved. So just be aware, make good choices, enjoy the area that you're in. Next slide. Great, so kind of the process of a potential removal from a program. So it's really important to note that your behavior may warrant a program leader or even your classmate has the right to report you to our office. So there is a way to report things if something's happened to you or if you've seen something happen to someone else or there's something that's gone on. There is a reporting system that can happen. So that report is made to our office and then that student is taken through the judicial process. So we have to make sure that everyone has their fair share, their fair rights, and it goes through the process in due process with due time. So we don't really see often that a student is completely removed from a program right away without going through that process. Once that student goes through that process and is found in violation, then they may be asked to or be removed from the program. If found responsible as well, there could be sanctions that follow you home or follow that student home upon their return. So what happens abroad doesn't necessarily can stay abroad, right? Next slide. This is kind of the levels or the areas in which sanctions happen. And we can start at the lowest level, which is a warning. So, hey, you did this is your first time, say cheating or plagiarism, you didn't know, or you're sorry. That might be a warning level, something that's like might be a warning. Could go to probation or probation final warning. So probation or probational final warning is a little bit of a higher level sanction. It lasts for a particular period of time. You would be notified how long that probationary period would last. And then if you were found to be responsible for another violation within that time period, you could potentially go straight to suspension. Just all depends on case by case basis, but that's kind of that middle level where say, hey, we're getting to some higher level stuff. Suspension and expulsion are obviously for things that are more intense and more egregious. We like to have a restorative approach and a holistic approach to talking with students about what's happened or some behavior that they might need to learn from. So a lot of our restorative sanctions include kind of an educational focus. So it could be writing an essay, it could be attending a counseling program, what we call a successful community learning program here on campus. It could be doing community service, or it could be paying for something that you may have damaged or may have hurt, harmed or stolen. So that's kind of our main goal, is that you're held accountable, but also kind of are aware of what's a thought process. Everyone is developing, everyone's growing, everyone makes mistakes. And so we want to make sure that you're having kind of the best possible outcome with something that might be a really tough situation. Your student conduct record. So it's different for some people, but something like a warning won't hold or be available on your unofficial transcript. Something like probation or suspension or expulsion would be available on that unofficial transcript. A lot of students who maybe want to enter law enforcement or work a federal government job, sometimes those jobs have background checks and ask for your student conduct record that you can sign off and say that you give permission for that record to be cleared. So that file is kept for 7 years per state law, but also just know that this could affect things outside of your academic time here at SDSU. If you're trying to apply to grad school or you're trying to get into a certain level job, sometimes those things do show up, or you might have to be asked to explain your student conduct record. Okay, I know that was like a super fun section, but does anyone have any questions? And also, if I don't know any questions, I will try to get back to you on any answers.
Thank you, Allison.
Yes.
Any questions for Allison? case you need a little more time to think of them, we're going to post a quick poll, I think, on this one too.
Awesome.
There we go.
Let's see if I did my job well.
I'll definitely say you did your job, Allison. Kind of pretty broad sweeping false response to that. In fact, the SDSU Student Code of Conduct does apply to students while they're studying abroad. So thank you for participating.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for being here today, Allison. I also just want to point out, I think someone did have a question earlier in the chat that we missed from Michaela, was asking about tech support. We will be talking about phones and internet tips in a couple of sections from now. So please stay tuned. We will get to that. All right. So there's the responses there. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next section, which will be presented by the Global Education Office, our very own Giancarlo Taylor. So Giancarlo will be talking to you today about culture and identity.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm delighted to see all of you here. Many of you I've already interacted with, those of you going to Spain or perhaps in the colleges of PSFA or the College of Education. Today, I wanted to talk a bit about culture and identity and just your awareness of this. So you go into the experience of being abroad, making it a rich experience and being aware of these things. So some things to keep in mind, things to remember, is that you're a cultural ambassador when you're studying abroad. So you are representing San Diego State University, your community, and also the United States. So this is a give and take relationship. It means that you're sharing your culture, where you're from, with those in your host country. But it's also an opportunity for you to listen and learn about what their culture is. And keep in mind that you're a guest in their country. So some of the things to keep in mind before you go, but also during the time that you're abroad, are thinking about what are some stereotypes about the United States, about cultures within the United States and people from the US that you might encounter. And likewise, the take part of this is to think about some things, some preconceptions that you may have had going to the country that you're going to, about stereotypes in that country. Next slide. So some special considerations when you do go abroad. Are there accommodations that you might need? And if so, in that country, if so, make sure to speak with your advisor or the person you're talking to within your provider. Notify your faculty leader or study abroad advisor if there are any special accommodations that you do need or special circumstances that we should be aware of. For LGBTQ travelers and students from minority communities, questions like, can I be open and will I be safe in the country to which I'm going? Is there a minority culture where I'm going that I can connect with, an LGBTQ resource that I can connect to when I'm going to that country? And of course, for female travelers, thinking about how does the country view and treat women? How dressing affects women where I'm treated? And how can I best prepare to ensure my safety? Paying attention to locals when you're there might be a good indicator. Also, politics and religion. We don't sometimes want to talk about these things, but think about it a bit. Is the country accepting of my religious and political views? And what are the main religious and political viewpoints where you're going? So this is a very brief synopsis of culture and identity, but some good things to think about before you go and while you're there. You can certainly find a lot more resources about this at travel.state.gov. And of course, there's a great website, diversityabroad.com, where you can find a lot more information about this. But we want you to have a rich experience and also a productive experience. So with that, I will sign off and pass this on to my colleague, Julie Dugan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for being here, sitting through all this information. I know that it's a lot on a Thursday afternoon. We've discussed your health conduct and identity abroad. Now let's discuss some logistics and housekeeping. Next, please. Has anyone done any research on their host country yet? I know it's obviously a lot going on in the semester, but has anyone done any research? You can just put in the chat if you have or if you haven't. If you have, that's great. Good job. If not, don't worry. This research, travel.state.gov, is an excellent place to start. It provides a lot of country-specific information about entry requirements, U.S. embassy locations, and cultural information similar to what Giancarlo was just talking about. And all of this can really prepare you for your trip. Since we've been discussing health and safety more broadly, this website can be a good place for you to focus specifically on your host country. Next slide, please. Another important thing that I would love to ask, and hopefully everyone says yes, but do you have a passport book yet valid through 6 months after your return date? Fingers crossed you all answer yes, because you will need one to travel abroad. And depending on your program length and location, you may also need a visa. This is another time that travel.state.gov will come in handy. Be sure to check and see if you need a visa. For programs that are shorter than 90 days, US citizens typically do not need a visa. But if you're an international student or you're going for a full semester, it's really important to check to see if you need a visa. Also, for international students, plan to check in with the ISC, the International Student Center that's over in the complex where GEO is, because you might need to get some forms signed and they can help you a little bit with that. And also, if you are a DACA student, we encourage you to check the latest updates around international travel and traveling as an undocumented individual, as well as speak with an immigration lawyer just to be safe as you prepare to travel. If you lose your passport abroad, will a picture be adequate to come back to the US? Great question. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about keeping some photocopies and of important things in a couple slides. Next slide, please. So the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, also known as STEP, is an excellent resource for you as well. It's available to all US citizens and nationals through the US government. And it's helpful in case of an emergency, especially as it will give the US Embassy and your family a way to get in touch with you. So if you haven't done all of the post-decision steps yet on Aztecs Abroad, you actually are prompted to enroll in STEP as one of those post-decision steps. So be sure to do that before you go. Next slide, please. Documents and banking. So this is what I was referring to, Kaylin, just a couple about your question. Before you go, there's some things to think about. One of which is making copies of important documents. Not only should you make physical hard copies, but I recommend also taking photos and also maybe keeping it secured in the cloud or providing it to a family or friend. And those copies should be of, say, like your insurance, your passport in case you lose it. The US Embassy can always help you if that's the case. Hopefully it doesn't happen. Your visa if you need one, credit cards, your airline tickets, all of that really important information, just in case you lose your phone or you lose those specific materials. Having backup copies is super helpful. And of course, also before you go, think about how you're going to access money abroad. Are you planning to use a credit card or a debit card? Does your bank have any international transaction fees? What is the exchange rate? All of these questions will help you prepare for making sure you can access money. Definitely make sure to let your bank know that you're traveling so they don't think your card was stolen and that someone's off in Barcelona using it and then shut it off, because obviously that would be a big headache for you to have to get in contact with them. Also, we recommend just bringing a nominal amount of cash with you, not too much, but a little bit for when you arrive, just so you have some cash as you're getting settled in your new host country. Next slide, please. Your trip is right around the corner. I know you have a lot on your mind right now, but it is good to be thinking about everything you need to get ready before you're going, and that includes packing. You might need to purchase some things before your trip, especially a power adapter. Depending on your host country, they may have different outlets and electrical currents. So you might require a specific adapter for your electronics. And when you're packing your clothes, pack everything you think you're gonna need and then take half of it out, because it's likely that you're overpacking. You can always do laundry, and you also wanna save some room for gifts and other things you might purchase. Plus, with everything that you pack, you're gonna have to carry. So the more you pack, the heavier the luggage, and the more getting around the airport is gonna be a little bit more difficult. So definitely pack light, and keep in mind the climate of your country. Does it rain a lot? Is it super humid? Pack accordingly so that you have the correct clothes that will be comfortable, especially comfortable shoes, because you'll be doing a lot of walking no matter what your program is. Definitely good to have comfortable walking shoes. We also recommend you have a mix of some casual clothes, some dressier clothes, and do a little bit of research to see what the local fashion is, what locals wear, so that you are wearing similar appropriate clothing. And also, depending on what activities are on your itinerary, you might be going to somewhere like a church or a mosque or another location that has a dress code, and you may need to cover your shoulders or something like that. So you can always be sure to bring a scarf or a shawl to make those types of visits a little bit easier. I cannot emphasize enough, knowing some of the language of your host country goes a long way. It will be really helpful getting around. Also, it's just polite to be able to speak some of the language that you're going to in their host country. And also to have some offline travel guides or maps, or there are some apps that you can do that will let you access everything offline, because as much as we are used to having Wi-Fi everywhere, you might not have Wi-Fi everywhere that you are once you're abroad. Next slide, please. Speaking of Wi-Fi, phone and internet. You are required by most study abroad programs to have an active phone plan in your host country, and we recommend it for safety reasons 100%. There are a few options to consider, especially with your phone. If you want to continue using your current phone, you can check with your current service provider about adding an international plan. Depending on how long you're going to be abroad, this could be super expensive. So there are a couple other options that you can consider as well. One is to get a local SIM card. So it's those teeny little cards that can go into your phone. Just make sure that you are having your phone unlocked by your service provider. So for Verizon, for example, sometimes only allows like Verizon cards to be in. So the phone needs to be unlocked to allow you to put a SIM card from a different provider. You could also choose to get one of those inexpensive old school flip phones. And both of those options, a local SIM card or an inexpensive phone, will be giving you a local phone number for the country that you're in. So you won't be using your US phone number, but you can still use that phone for, say, when you have Wi-Fi and you want to use some of the easy free apps to communicate with your friends who are on the program or with your family, such as WhatsApp. Zoom is always good, Google Voice, Viber. These are free options where you can still communicate with people either in your host country or back in the US. Next slide, please. And flights. Before you buy your flights, or many of you may have already bought your flights, but don't worry, I'm sure that you have already done this because you're all super conscientious. Double check the arrival and departure dates for your program and keep in mind the time change. You may need to leave a day or two earlier than the program arrival date if you're traveling across multiple time zones. For example, if you're traveling to Europe, Almost all flights from the US to Europe are overnight flights the day before, and you will be arriving the next morning, usually very early morning. Read all of the communication that you get from your faculty leader, your program representatives, or your host university regarding your expected arrival before booking your flights. And if you haven't booked your flights yet, but you want to start looking, highly recommend that you search on an incognito window, because if you're constantly looking at flights on your typical browser, the airlines are super tricky and they collect cookies, and then they might higher the price on you, which is obviously no fun. You save some money for on your flight, and then you get to use it while you're abroad. And if you plan to travel on your own and arrive before your program, or you won't be utilizing the airport pickup if your program includes an airport pickup, be sure to let your program manager, coordinator, or the faculty member know that you are going to be arriving earlier than the start date of the program. Lastly, strongly encourage you to book a refundable flight and trip protection. This is to ensure that you'll have coverage if anything happens, especially with COVID and everything going on. Having trip protection is really, really helpful, and it's definitely worth the extra money. Next slide, please. And lastly, you received an email yesterday about information to purchase the SDSU insurance. Certain program types are required to enroll in our on-call insurance. Those are listed on the screen, but again, they're SDSU exchanges, IB exchanges, any direct enroll programs such as John Cabot, partner programs without a required insurance policy, that includes Therapy Abroad, IVHQ, Green Program, and our faculty-led global seminars, as well as other programs led by SDS faculty, like the Oaxaca Internship Program, and bilateral partner summer programs. So that could be the MASIFA program in Paris, for example. If you are not participating in any of those programs and are maybe doing a program run by CSUIP, ISEP, API, SIT, CFHI, DIS, SIPN, CPIN, or Semester at Sea, you do not need to purchase on-call insurance because you have insurance in your program or are required to purchase a type of insurance through your program that has been vetted by SDSU. If you want to purchase on-call anyways, you are more than welcome to do so, but it would not be required. Always carry your on-call card with you and take a photo of it similarly to the other important documents, just to have in case of an emergency. You can also give a picture of the card to your family as well, and familiarize yourself with the plan and what is covered and not covered before you go. Next slide, please. Okay. Lastly, when should you call on call? Always call them first. They can connect you to any needed resources. Again, definitely read the coverage carefully to see exactly what on-call offers. It is super robust, ranging from just needing to see a doctor for an appointment, to hospitalization, to evacuation due to a natural disaster, to COVID. There is COVID quarantine coverage as well. So if you get COVID, they will cover up to $5,000 total to stay in a hotel up to 14 days. They even cover daily food costs up to $50 a day, change in your airfare fee up to $1,000. So it is really, really a great insurance policy. And apart from those, they also have other travel benefits. So if there is a trip delay, if you lose some of your belongings, if you have a trip cancellation, things like that are also covered by on-call. Next slide. All right, I think there's going to be another poll now, right?
That's right. It's poll time. And then I have a couple of questions I've been getting in the chat that I'd like to quickly recap. So first we'll do the poll and then we'll address some questions. True or false? Students must travel with a passport book. A passport card will not be accepted. Okay, we've got just about everyone, about 3/4 of you all have responded. Okay. So 94% said true and 6% said false. This was a bit of a trick question. So technically, if you're going on a trans-border experience and you're just going across the border to Mexico, a passport card would be accepted. But for anywhere else, you must have a passport book. So the true answer to this question is true. You must have a passport book. I did get a question actually during the last couple minutes here about a passport not being renewed in time for departure. If you are concerned about your passport not being renewed in time for departure, please look into expediting that renewal if possible. You may have to pay more for it, but just know you will not be able to participate or travel without a valid passport that is going to be valid for the time that Julie mentioned early in her presentation, and that is 6 months following the final date or your return date from your program. Okay, so there we go. It's the answers to that poll. I think we have one more poll question. Let's do that. Ready for the next poll? Okay, insurance question. Which SDSU programs require students to enroll in SDSU's foreign travel insurance through On-Call International? Okay, so no one missed this one technically because the answer was all of the above. SDSU Exchange, IB Exchange, Direct Enroll, partner programs without a required policy, and global seminars all require the SDSU foreign travel insurance. That is through the On-Call International company, but our website says JCB Insurance, so it's that link that was sent out yesterday. And you will also see a document in your post-decision phase of Aztecs Abroad in those signature documents and questionnaires you need to fill out. You will see also the information about on-call insurance in there. There's even a video about the on-call insurance policy and a link to the policy inclusions in case your parents are interested in seeing exactly what you will have coverage for while you're abroad. Okay, thank you very much, Julie, for all of that great information. I want to also highlight that if you lose your passport abroad, there was a question in the chat that was responded to, but I just want to highlight it. A picture is not adequate to return to the US if you lose your passport. So the US Embassy in the location where you are located can help you if you lose a passport. So please rest assured there is help if you lose a passport. But that said, having to replace a lost passport while abroad is a huge event that can negatively impact your experience, and it's a huge pain. So you'll spend a lot of time at the embassy, you'll miss out on a lot of your program activities, and so I just want to reiterate how important it is to protect your passport. I know that when I was studying abroad, and every time I travel really since then, I've always used a money belt to keep my passport in. So very often, if a passport is in a pocket of your bag or your purse, it's easy to misplace it. And the more easy it is to misplace, the more easy it is to lose. And also the easier it is for someone to steal it. Pickpocketing is something that was going to be addressed in the next section, but it is something that happens. And so it's just really important for you to make sure that your passport stays safe throughout the whole thing. I also want to say that there was a question here regarding the registration and global seminars with multiple cities. And a host university. For global seminar students, you don't really have to worry too much about delineating what cities you're going to be in and what host university you're going to be in for the purposes of our registration. We know by the program So just write in whichever is the easiest to get the registration done. So thanks for that question. I also want to make sure we didn't miss anything else here. You are not able to get another copy of your passport. And if you are still waiting to see if you're accepted to your program, please hold off on purchasing a plane ticket just yet. You will get your acceptance very soon. And if you haven't heard for a while, it's okay to follow up. We're getting more and more acceptances every day. And there are different schedules and different start dates for all the programs that are that you represent in this meeting today. So don't panic if you haven't heard your final acceptance just yet. Okay, so for our next section here, I want to welcome our Assistant Director, Tyne Trong, for International Security, Safety, and Risk. And he is one of our newest members of International Affairs, and he has the next section on safety security.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to go into some safety issues. Some of this stuff was already gone through before with referencing the State Department. They're a huge resource for you, and I highly recommend that you, again, download the STEP app so that you can get embassy resources and get updated real time, or as real as possible, that the U.S. government can provide with what's going on in your region or city or country that you're in. Next slide, please. Okay, so some things that you can do before you leave and think about is making an individual safety and security plan, right? So whether you're traveling with a group, by yourself, or with a faculty-led or program leader, you're responsible for your own safety and security, right? So let's just say you're traveling with a group, faculty-led group, right? Well, there's going to be a group plan, and the faculty leader is going to go over it with you and all of the participants. But let's just say you can't, for whatever reason, execute that group plan, right? You need to have a plan for yourself, what you're going to do when things go wrong, okay? So the three things that I want you to take away from this, and it's embedded throughout this presentation, is communication, communication, communication. That's number one. Number two is plan ahead. Think about what you're going to do. And the third thing is use common sense with whatever it is that you're doing. You know, sometimes you'll be whether it's program related or, you know, sightseeing or whatever the case may be, you'll be presented with a choice, right? Make the common sense choice. If you go into a situation and your spider sense goes off that something's wrong here, that will not fail you, okay, that sense. So again, communication, common sense, and have an individual plan. Next slide, please.
Okay, Tyne, I'm going to jump in here really quickly
Okay.
on this one. The previous slides that Tyne was showing you are just sort of some before you go steps. This is another very specific before you go step. SDSU is providing this Alert Traveler app to you. This is a mobile app to keep students safe when they're traveling. It keeps you informed of critical events that might impact you while abroad. This is similar to what STEP provides you, but it's very tailored to SDSU students on study abroad programs. It will also allow SDSU specifically to assist you in the event of an emergency. So you see some screenshots here from a phone. And so we recommend that you use a smartphone, preferably the one that you're going to be taking with you, and download that Alert Traveler app. And you can do that by logging into the Aztecs Abroad application right from your phone, the way that you always have been throughout your process, and select Alert Traveler from the menu. It's going to be that option at the top right there, like you see on the screen. Enter your phone number and copy the automatically generated password. Finally, you'll enter the password in the app and you'll sync up your phone then with Aztecs Abroad. So just a couple of things about this. Students only become eligible for the Alert Traveler app 30 days prior to the application's, the itinerary start date in Aztecs Abroad. So if you're going abroad this fall and you're not leaving until August, you're not going to see this yet. But we're just letting you know because some of you are getting ready to depart maybe at the end of May. So you're going to see this very soon. This is a way for SDSU to support you. So I really want you to know that it's only tracking your location for the event of an emergency. This is by no means to be a big brother following you around, watching your every move. No, we've already talked about common sense and having a plan, and that's your responsibility. But this is something that's an additional support source for you in case of an emergency. You're able to go in there and let SDSU know that you need help. And in turn, SDSU will be able to reach out to you in case of an emergency. When the pandemic broke out during spring 2020, this type of app is the type of app where students get a notification, they report in, I'm safe, this is my plan, this is how I'm gonna get home, this is how I'm gonna be safe, things like that. So do please download that and keep the GPS tracking on. It's not necessary to have the password emailed to you. Once you activate the app, it should remain activated unless you switch phones or purchase a SIM card. So we just were talking about phones, and some of you will be purchasing a SIM card. So in that case, you will need to make an update after you arrive. So just to put that on your radar. And of course, if you have any trouble along the way with that, you can always reach out to the Global Education Office and ask us any questions. But we just want to put that on your radar so that it is something that you take advantage of. It's a great resource for safety and security. So Tyne, back to you.
Thanks, Chris. Can we go one slide back? I just want to flesh out some things. So again, for the communication piece, I can't reiterate enough how important that is. Okay, so plan on you're going to have a smartphone, or you're going to buy a SIM card overseas. Please beta test that when you're in country. Meaning, test out your equipment, test out the apps, make sure that they're working. And again, going to Alert Traveler, that us being able to track you and when things really go wrong, that's only going to happen if you enable GPS, right? We can't make you enable GPS, but we can highly encourage you to do so. And that's the point that I want to get across. Also know and understand the local laws of the country and region that you're in, and of the host provider or university that you might be involved with. Because again, there's specific safety and health issues in those countries that they may make you have to do things to require you to participate in whatever activity or even enter the country, right? And then of course, as you all may know, in the news, some countries have a very draconian laws regarding things like possession of drugs, right? Some countries have a death penalty attached to that. Then understand also the emergency response organizations and capabilities of that country, right? So we're talking country infrastructure at this point. Things like, what kind of transportation are you going to be taking? Will you have vetted it in advance before you get there? You can also vet it while you're there, just by word of mouth. But, we live in a digital age, right? Where you can just Google somebody, Google a taxi company. Hopefully there's an Uber or a Lyft there, because those companies, Uber and Lyft, have very robust vetting of their drivers, right? For things like criminal history and stuff like that. And then also, as it's applicable or important to you as a priority, identify the medical and emotional support resources in country if you're going to need it. Now, On Call International, our San Diego State University's emergency assistance provider, they have that capability. So, but if you don't have on-call insurance or as an emergency assistance provider, please look into that for whatever emergency assistance provider that you have. Next slide, please. Okay, once you're in country, let your family know that you've arrived safely, so that they're not worrying about you. As always, in country, be aware of your surroundings. Don't travel alone at night. Use the buddy system. I would say that's a safe thing 24/7 when you're going out and about. Go with someone else, and then hopefully someone within the group always has a working active cell phone. that they've tested out, the apps. They have the phone numbers ready to go if they need to call On-Call International, etc. And then also know what typical crime takes place in that location, like pickpocketing is a common one. And then have an action plan to counter the various threats that your research has shown you is frequent in that country, right? Have a plan, the proverbial saying, be a lion, don't be a lamb, all right? And that comes to planning and being ready to do what it is that you're gonna need to do to counter the threat. Next slide, please. Okay, again, so we're just repeating, carry a smartphone, maintain regular contact with your program leaders, stuff that you wouldn't do domestically, it's not a good idea to do abroad, like, revealing your personal identifiable information, PII, social security number, date of birth, etc. Public demonstrations, if that's going on, or in your research, it's shown that on this date and time, your program happens to be near one of these demonstrations. If there's a way that you can plan around it to not be anywhere near that, that's a recommendation, right? Don't be involved or participate in or be near a public demonstration that can go awry. Again, so your communications, getting back to that. What if the cell phone towers go down and your smartphones are unavailable for use? So what's the backup plan, right? So maybe it's the internet. You will have found an internet cafe or cafes plural to be able to access and have money to pay the person to let you use that internet to communicate. Those are things that you can plan for in advance, and also when you get in country, right? And then just common sense things again. Don't talk to strangers. And next slide, please. Oh, I just want to say, if you plan to leave your program early for whatever reason, obviously, please let your program leader know, let your family and friends know what's going on with you, so that they're not worrying or receive a call that you're leaving for X reasons and they're surprised. Okay, this is very important. In an emergency, get to a place of safety, handle the situation safely, and then call the local 911 equivalent. But that means being prepared to communicate in that language the emergency that's happening to you. You can have like a generalized script ready. I need help and I'm at this location. Be prepared to say that. But then always, so I'm former law enforcement, just FYI. And one of the very earliest things that was taught us is orient yourself north, south, west, and east, wherever you are in the world, because that will help you communicate your position when you need help. Okay, this is a military standard as well, but just in terms of like being able to get help to your location, there's ways that you can do that. Okay, wherever you are in the world. Okay, so again, a script, I've been assaulted at location X, I need help and I'm at location Y. Be prepared to say that in the language. And then when it's safe to do so, contact On-Call International, right? On-Call International being SDSU's emergency assistance provider, or its equivalent if you don't buy the on-call insurance and have that as your provider. They'll additionally coordinate resources with you. But at that very moment, when something's happening, understand what it is that you're going to do. And when you're able to get to a place of safety, that's the fight, flight, or hide concept that's used here domestically. That also applies over there. Get to a place of safety, call the 911 equivalent, and then when things settle down and you're able to do so safely, contact On-Call International. Next slide, please. Again, these three things, like what was mentioned at the beginning. Communications, very important. And then the backup communication plans, if the first choice plan, cell phone goes down, and then maybe the second choice plan is internet communication. If that goes down, then what? If you have to communicate with 2 Campbell soup cans and a piece of string, what does that look like, right? So maybe that's regular meeting places like a cafe or whatever, to be able to tell your faculty leader that you're okay, for example, if you're in a faculty-led program. And common sense, exercise it, wherever you're at, and then plan ahead. There's stuff that you can do before you even get on the plane to go to your foreign country, but then also when you're in country, you can do things to plan ahead as well. And I think that's the last slide for me.
Yes, I think that is the final slide. Were there any more poll? Thank you so much, Tyne.
Yep.
Any more poll questions? I think we may be finished. Okay, so next steps now that you've gotten a lot of information very quickly, we will send you this presentation and the recording along with some other helpful resources that we provided during this presentation. For applicable programs, please review the On-Call International Insurance registration information and make sure you are registering for coverage for the dates of your travel. So sometimes a very common question we receive is, I don't know exactly which dates I'm going to travel yet. So hold off and buy your insurance to correspond with the dates of your flights. That means that you'll have coverage from when you depart from the US and when you return back to the US. Even if you're going to travel afterwards, that's okay. You can book the on-call insurance to cover you for your program, plus up to 30 days ahead of or after your program. If you haven't finished all those required post-decision documents within Aztecs Abroad, please do so. If you haven't fully committed to your program, there should be a commit button that you need to click in order to let us know that you are in fact participating. Some of you, I think, may still be in pending status. Maybe you're still waiting on an acceptance from your host institution, from your provider. Like I said before, that's perfectly normal, but as soon as you do get that, make sure you let us know, make sure you're communicating with your advisor so that we can have all the most up-to-date information about your plans and let all the appropriate offices on campus know that you are in fact participating. Okay, any other questions that anyone has before we let you go enjoy the rest of your Thursday afternoon? You can post them in the chat, you can raise your hand, or you can speak up. Okay. Well, here's one. How soon should we purchase foreign travel insurance? If you have your dates of travel, you can go ahead and purchase that right away. That information was sent out last night, April 20th, via email, and it should also be posted in the post-decision steps of your Aztecs Abroad portal, so you can do that right away. Applying for visas, please check in with your global education advisor if you're having some questions about visas. We don't offer visa support particularly, but we can point you to the right direction. Many times it's the consulate in LA or in San Francisco, depending on your permanent address, you may have access to, and you can get the checklist there and of all the documents you'll need to collect to apply for your visa. Thank you. You're very welcome. Does JCB include flight insurance? You'll want to review and see exactly what it does and does not cover. There is some trip interruption insurance that is available there, but you'll want to read very carefully the details if that is something that you are definitely shopping for insurance. ISEP students do not need any other insurance. That is correct. ISEP is the only insurance required for ISEP students. CSUIP insurance is the only insurance required for CSUIP students. API, just go with the API insurance, and so on and so forth. Does the class Gen S 450 satisfy the cultural diversity graduation requirement? I will need to, no, it does not. Thank you, Julie. What is the format, or what do I have to upload for outbound travel itinerary upload? Your confirmation of your flight is typically what we're looking for there, so that we can update your departure date and your arrival back date. And yes, just to recap, Genesis 450 satisfies your upper division explorations area C, but it does not cover the cultural diversity graduation requirement. Any other questions while you have us here? I'm going to also put in the chat here the general global education office at sdsu.edu email. That is the place where you can get some answers to questions that may still be lingering after this presentation. Okay. What if I'm planning on traveling a few weeks before my program? Do I